Let me tell you what I learned when I built my workshop.
Hi, I'm Joe, and welcome to MotorCity Boat Werks. Let's get to work.
This episode is part 3 of my ongoing series about how I built the boat shop and some of the lessons that I learned during the whole process. Some folks have sent me some questions about the boat shop and they want to know how it was built and how much it cost. But there are also some lessons that I learned in the process. In part 1 of this series, I talked about how and why I built the boat shop, and I gave some tips that you might use if you're building something similar. In part 2, I talked about the actual construction of the boat shop and what it cost. Be sure to check out those episodes. They've got a lot of good information. This is something a little different than what I normally do. There's not many boat projects involved here, but it's simply about the shop. You know, before I started building the boat shop, I did a bunch of research. I watched all the videos on YouTube that I could find about how to build a boat shop, things to consider, some lessons learned, what it was really going to cost. I found some of the information to be a little bit lacking. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about some of the things that surprised me while I was trying to get my boat shop built. Now, some of these lessons learned might be kind of obvious, but the only reason that I'm bringing them up is that I really want to stress how important they are. If you're thinking of undertaking a project like this, where you want to build yourself a workshop that rivals all other workshops, I encourage you to take the time to do your research. Talk to folks who have a shop, walk around, check them all out so you can begin to understand what it is that you need so that your shop becomes, well, something just perfect for you.
Lesson number 1, zoning and permits. I talked about this briefly in one of the other episodes. You really need to pay attention to your zoning. Make sure that where you live, you can build the type of building that you want to have. There's all kinds of rules and regulations about what can and can't be built and where it has to be located relative to your house or property. Now, if you're doing it yourself, you really got to pay attention to codes and regulations. This is for your safety as well as everyone else in the community. But if you're having a builder do the work, well, you've got to supervise to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. One of the lessons that I learned during the whole process of having MotorCity Boat Werks built, I was worried about making sure the building met the dimensions that were required by the zoning requirements. And it turned out in the end that the inspector never actually came to the building and measured it. He was really only concerned with making sure that the posts were constructed properly, that the electrical was put in according to code, and that everything else was kind of done insofar as construction, not really whether or not the building actually matched the plans that had been gone into for the permit. I gotta say, this is kind of frustrating because if I had known he wasn't gonna pay attention to the plans, I probably would have made my pole barn bigger. But what are you gonna do? If you don't follow the rules, your city or county may make you tear it all down or start it all over again. And that just costs you time and money. The problem is if you don't follow the zoning requirements and you don't get your permits done properly ahead of time and have the necessary inspections, well, you may have a problem when it comes time to sell your building or your property. The new buyer is going to want to make sure that all of these bureaucratic things have been taken care of. It's just the price of doing business. Lesson number 2, commitment. It goes without saying that if you're doing a large build or a large construction project, well, you've got to have commitment. You've got to be committed both financially, time-wise, energy, effort, everything. It's not enough to have a small pool of money to get the project started. You really need to have your finances worked out ahead of time because I guarantee you there's going to be some extra costs. One of the lessons that I learned was that this project was very, very involved from start to finish. It took longer than expected. It ran about 5 or 10% over the budget that I had in my mind of what I wanted to put forward for the boat shop. Luckily, I had a lot of money saved up ahead of time, and I was ready and fully committed to seeing this project through. But if you haven't done your research and you're not prepared to go all the way, whatever it takes to get your build finished, well, you may end up with half a structure or a structure that is not ready to be used.
Are you enjoying the show? Well, do me a favor. Would you hit the like button and also subscribe? Spread the word about MotorCity Boat Werks. No BS, just boats and restoration.
Lesson number 3, supervision. You know, I was very concerned during my build project. I kept coming down to the job site, poking around, asking questions, looking to see what people were doing, trying to understand how the build was unfolding. And I always was kind of self-conscious. I felt like, why am I bothering these guys? They seem to know what they're doing. Luckily, they were patient and they answered my questions. The lesson I learned is that you've got to supervise. You've got to pay attention to every aspect of your project. It's your project. You're paying for it. I can give you a great example of where I should have said something and I didn't early on. In the early days of the construction project, the supplies were delivered to the house and kind of stacked in the backyard around the job site. One of the things that was delivered actually very early was the garage door, or parts of the garage door. Because COVID-19 had kind of messed up all of the shipping and everything for certain types of building supplies, the garage door was ordered very early and it arrived a little bit before it was time at the job site. So they brought it to the job site, stacked it up in the backyard where it sat outside for a number of weeks. Well, of course, during that time period, one of the panels for the garage door got damaged. And after the fact, once the garage door was fully assembled and put up in place, well, guess what? There were 2 dents in the garage door, and I just had to say something to the builder. Come on, I was paying tens of thousands of dollars for this building, and now I already have dents in my garage door, and I didn't even cause them. Well, this meant that new panels had to be ordered for the garage door, which they did, but it took a number of weeks for those to be delivered, in fact, several months. The garage door was the single biggest hassle for the entire construction project. And this was primarily due to the builder's choice of subcontracting the garage door installation to someone else. It was not done by him or his family or any of his employees. He hired that job out to someone who was basically supposedly a professional at installing garage doors. Ultimately, they were not. Their work was terrible. They didn't know what they were doing. It really turned into quite a bit of a hassle. Ultimately, I fired them. I then had to go back to the builder and explain to him that I was going to get my own garage door installer to do the job properly. Lesson number 4, fenestration. The one thing I learned in this build that I really did not expect was pay attention to your fenestration. Now, fenestration is a weird architectural term. It means the doors and openings that are there for a building. I would tell people, if you're having a pole barn workshop built, make sure you pay attention to your fenestration. Pay attention to your doors and windows. Don't just write them off as, that's another door, I don't need to worry about it. The doors and windows are what make the structure special. Ultimately, I hired someone else to install the garage door, and it worked out quite well. But during their installation, they gave me a little bit of advice. In the future, whenever you're building your own workshop, your own pole barn, make sure that your garage door comes from an outside provider, not from the builder who's responsible for doing the building. The simple fact is that garage door installers, well, they're experts in doing that. And the choices they can offer you insofar as an extra insulated door or a door with extra features, they can really make a difference to your bottom line. They're going to get you a far superior product than whatever the builder would throw into the build package. A classic example is my shop. The walls are R19, the ceiling is R36, the garage door it's R5, even though it's an insulated door. And for a couple $100 more, that number could have been bumped up significantly to make a more efficient workspace. I sourced the French doors to go inside my workshop. And if I had really thought about it, I probably would have added additional windows instead of just the 7 that I had. When I first planned my pole barn workshop, I thought, well, I'll just have a couple of windows. I'll set them up high, 1 or 2 on each side of the building. When I spoke to the builder during the estimate, I came to find out that the windows only cost $150 a piece. I could add several more. So I upped the number of windows from 3 to 7, and now, looking back on it over time, boy, I should have gone to 10 or 12. The more windows, the better. The more light, and it just makes it wonderful to work. Lesson number 5, barn liner. I spoke about this in one of the earlier episodes. I love the barn liner inside my workshop, but I can tell you it does present some challenges, especially when you're mounting things to the wall. Because the barn liner has a ribbed texture, well, you can't mount things 100% flush against the wall. You're going to actually have little spacers to be able to accommodate for the texture of the wall. Now, this is not particularly difficult, but it is an extra step you've got to take when you're mounting shelves or you're putting pegboard on the walls. Another thing you've got to consider is that whatever you mount to the walls, well, it has to have something to be mounted to. The metal for the barn liner is actually very thin, so you've got to make sure that you mount on the poles or on what's called the purloins. The purloins are what go horizontal inside the walls of the pole barn. And the poles, of course, are the ones that are vertical. You've got to kind of space everything to make sure that you're hitting a purloin or a pole when you're mounting things into the walls. Now, some people online have suggested that metal barn liner, well, it'll condensate, or the acoustics are not very good. There's a lot of echo, and it just doesn't create a very pleasant environment to work in. But I'm here to tell you that's simply not the case. The acoustics inside my pole barn might be a little difficult for YouTube recording, but they're wonderful for daily operation. And when you play your music, man, it sounds fantastic. There's not too much echo, and I have no problem with condensation. If you have a metal building and you've got problems with condensation on the metal interior surfaces, well, you've got some other problems, and it has to do with insulation. Lesson number 6, big projects, big headaches. One of the biggest lessons I learned building this workshop is that if you go big, well, you've got to plan for bigger issues. In the case of my pole barn, the sidewalls are 16 feet tall, and that means you need a 16-foot step ladder to reach anything up high. You've got to have a lot of light in order to be able to illuminate things down near the floor. You're going to have a larger garage door, so you're going to need a commercial garage door opener. You're going to have a taller, bigger building. Well, you're going to also need commercial gutters to make sure that the water stays away from the foundation. Big projects mean big headaches, so make sure you keep that in mind. A building with 16-foot sidewalls is really tall. The last thing you want is a house with a giant fire station-looking building looming behind it. In my case, I was lucky. The pole barn sits at a lower elevation than the main house, and actually, you can't see it when you're looking at the front of the house. But all this necessitated that I had to build a driveway down to the pole barn, and as you know, that was an added expense. Lesson number 7. Interior size versus exterior size. One of the most important lessons that I learned during my pole barn build, and really the reason that I wanted to make this video, was to point out that even though the dimensions of your building for your permits and your planning with the builder, might say particular dimensions, the actual dimensions, the usable dimensions of the pole barn on the interior, well, they're going to be something different. This is something that I did not plan for. I knew the interior of the building would be slightly smaller than the exterior dimensions used in the permitting and planning, but I didn't realize how much. When you have a pole barn that has 6-inch poles, Well, there's going to be the thickness of the 6-inch pole, plus the insulation, plus the interior barn liner, which is in and of itself maybe 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches, and then you're going to get to the space that's left over inside your building. So in my case, this meant that the exterior dimensions of the building were somewhere around, 39 by 27. But when you got to the actual interior of the building, like to put a boat on a trailer, well, that all was reduced down to somewhere around 26.5 by, say, 36.5, 37 feet. This means that if you have a boat on a trailer or, say, a very large RV, you've got to know what are your absolute maximum dimensions of the vehicle that you're trying to put inside your building. And you got to plan ahead for it, because the last thing you want to do is build a $50,000 pole barn, but you can't fit your boat and trailer inside. Luckily, I didn't have that problem, but if you're not careful, it can sneak up on you.
Well, there you have it. Another great episode. This week, I want to introduce something new. If I feature your question on an episode of MotorCity Boat Werks, I will send you one of these. A MotorCity Boat Werks shop decal made from the tears of 1,000 unicorns. Free. If you have a question for me, please leave a comment below or contact me via the MotorCity Boat Werks website. The email is listed on the description and my YouTube channel. Thank you, and have a great week.
If you like these videos, please hit the subscribe button. These videos would not be possible without your support.